we are tweaking and fine tuning all of that and making them more efficient. So it's going to be something that's going to be like leveraged and used in a lot of contexts. And
it's a huge game changer for like every context. Yes. I think about IGA and I think about a business user being able to create an access review ad hoc.
Yes. Yeah.
Just by describing what they want to see in the results.
Yes.
Who has access to this certain role in my application and has used it within the past 60 days?
Absolutely.
And then, Jim McDonald comes back. Okay, tell me what Jim McDonald has done in my application over the past 60 days. I think, being able to query and quiz based on human language model, so powerful.
Yeah, the voice.
As long as it's accurate.
Yeah, that's true. As long as it's not hallucinating.
This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Stedman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
Not so bad. Yourself?
Doing great. So on the last episode, I told you I'm in Sturgis, South Dakota for the big bike rally, the world's biggest bike rally. And then I was going to see Jelly Roll in concert. Mm-hmm. Well, I saw him in concert on Tuesday. And Jeff, I've been to probably 200 concerts in my life. No exaggeration. I go to 10, 15 concerts or music festivals a year. And this has to be one of the best all-time concerts I've been to. And what I realized, it's kind of a weird realization, but what I realized was that concert technology has taken a major, hyper leap into the future. So behind him, he had what I would call like a widescreen, like a huge television. Potentially it was being projected, I don't know. But the clarity of things as they're moving, as they're cutting in, video of him live on stage with other things happening in the background. You could render that on your computer screen, but to render that, 100 by 100 is pretty amazing. And the other thing was, it's like a two-dimensional screen behind him, but it looked like it was 3D. He had this skull that looked like it was hovering over the center of the stage, and it looked like lights were going around it on the skull. And man, it looked like three-dimensional. It was blowing me away. So yes, he was performing. It was a great performance, but the tech was blowing me away. And I was thinking, I wish Jeff was here to see this.
It sounds pretty interesting. I'll be honest, I don't know the first thing about Jelly Rolls other than eating them. So I have no idea what type of music it is, or I don't know if I've ever heard a Jelly Roll song.
Oh, yeah, you've definitely seen him. He's about 350, 400 pounds. He's got tattoos all over his face. He's definitely right in the center of pop culture, right? And it's kind of a mix between hip hop, rap, and rock and roll and country music. He's got something going on that I wouldn't say there's anybody else who does exactly what he does. And then he's like a Southern Baptist preacher. He gets in between his songs and he starts preaching to the crowd and getting people fired up. And he's a really cool guy. But his concert was just something else, and the technology was a big part of that.
Well, you texted me a couple of pictures. Kind of hard to see on a small iPhone screen, and probably didn't do it justice. But I'm glad you had a good time. There's nothing quite like live music, I don't think, especially when it's a great performance. So good for you, man.
Yeah, and I'm having a great time. Concerts are great. Last night I was
must be nice.
At another concert. In between performers, they had this thing where people were riding motorcycles between the crowd. Now they put this caution tape but it created a false sense of safety, I think, because these guys are riding, 800-pound motorcycles fast and doing wheelies and burnouts and stuff. And I was thinking all it takes is for them to slip, mess up, and you get hit by one of those motorcycles, man, you're dead on arrival.
So you got that going for you. You got good music and then the potential death by motorcycle.
Good music, and I survived. So, yeah.
Well, good. Well, it sounds like you're having a good time. You're traveling. I'm in another hotel, courtesy of our day jobs. So I'm in, where am I right now? Minneapolis.
You're always in Minneapolis or New York.
I am. I'm up here quite a bit. Weather is absolutely perfect today. I want to say felt like 72 degrees. I went out for lunch, met somebody, had lunch with them wearing, I'm shorts and a t-shirt at this point. So perfect weather. But now I head to Dallas tomorrow for the surprise birthday party that we talked about in our last episode. So,
right.
Yes.
And we will be spoiling the surprise by doing this episode because it's going to
It'll be a couple weeks out at this point. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm officially on PTO. It's first time since, I guess, December that I've been on PTO for a day or two.
You're a December PTO guy. You save it all up until the end.
Yeah. I mean, nobody does anything anyway between Christmas and New Year's, kind of roughly in that area. So it's easier to take that time off and not have quite the backlog when you get back into work.
Yeah. So in our last episode, we talked about RFPs. And one thing that we should have mentioned is don't issue your RFP and make the response due on January 2nd or 3rd.
Yeah,
because that means that some poor unfortunate soul is going to have to work on that thing for the last 2 weeks of the year.
What do you mean some poor? That's us. We're the poor unfortunate souls.
Yes, I'm the poor unfortunate soul. You're the poor unfortunate soul. Trying to get that done with people who are all on vacation.
See, now that's a sneaky play. If you're doing an RFP like that, that is all that raises suspicions that you're not really open to an RFP. You're trying to, get someone in and hope that you get few respondents or fewer respondents and make it easier for a preferred vendor or something like that. Not saying it's wrong or right. I'm just saying that's what I would do if I were in the customer's shoes and I had a preferred vendor. Yeah. All right. Let's talk conferences because we actually have 3 conferences to talk about because we have a new discount code for one coming up. Let's start with Identity Week. You and I are going to be at Identity Week America, September 11th and 12th. If you use code IDAC30, you get 30% off your registration. That code also works for the Asia conference taking place in Singapore, October 22nd, 23rd. I'm going to be hosting some sort of panel there with a bunch of really smart people and just trying to generally keep up with them. And you and I will be doing podcast things there. So hopefully people come out and say hello and show support. Doesn't cost you anything to use the code. We don't get anything other than just, hey, we were able to refer people to come out there and join us. What else? We got Authenticate Conference. That is also coming up sooner than we probably wish it were because we have so much to do for it. But that's October 14th and 16th in Carlsbad, California. If you use the code IDAC15, you get 15% off your registration. And the early bird, I believe, is ending soon, September 9th. So depending on when you listen to this, hopefully you have stacked discounts at that point. If not, still use the code, get 15% off. And then the new one, you want to talk about Sempris?
Yeah, so the Sempris conference is called the HIP conference. It's going to be a very hip conference. It stands for Hybrid Identity Protection. And we got a discount code for that as well. IDAC POD, IDAC POD. That gets you 20% off. That conference is in a very cool city, New Orleans, and it takes place from November 13th through 14th.
Yeah, that's a cool one.
I'm excited. So anybody out there who's listening, who's, you have a conference and you want to issue a discount code, here's the requirement. IDAC podcast only tells our listeners about the best conference or discount code. So if you come in, you give us a 15% discount code and you give somebody else a 20%, you get blacklisted. We'll never mention your conference again. Ain't happening.
That conference is dead to me.
Exactly. So guys, when we give a conference code, we always make sure that it's the best one available. Otherwise, we're not going to talk it up. So
Yeah.
the 3 that we gave today are the best available for those conferences.
Yeah.
Anybody out there who's got a conference that's in the identity space, it's got to be identity related and wants to do the same.
Or security.
Just,
InfoSec is fine, I think, if there's related areas.
Yeah, it can't be comic conference or whatever.
Hey, I like Comic-Con. I'll go to Comic-Con. If Comic-Con wants to sponsor and like bring us out there and do a discount code, I will not say no to that. I'm just saying.
All right. If we get to go out to Comic-Con, then I guess I'll soften up. I was looking for some kind of conference we won't do, but you're right. There's probably very few that we wouldn't at least show up if we can get on in there for free and they want the podcast. All right.
Can you imagine Identity Center at something like Comic-Con? I mean, I know you and I are nerds and that's geek culture and I'm all about it, but I think most people are like, who the heck are these guys?
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
All right, let's get going with today's show. We are joined by Merill Fernando. He's a product manager, I should say, at Microsoft, joining us all the way from Melbourne, Australia. Welcome to the show, Merill.
Hey, Jeff. Hey, Jim. I'm super excited to be here, joining all of you to talk all things identity. It's my passion these days.
Well, you're amongst friends because this is what we do here. Real quickly, though, what do you think of like Identity at the Center being at like Comic-Con or something like that? How do you think that would fly?
I'm sure my kids will roll their eyes. Yeah, would be exciting though.
That would be the ultimate crossover. How about that? All right, let's talk a little about your identity background. How did you get into the world of identity? Is it something that you chose, or did it choose you?
It actually chose me. So I'm relatively new to identity. I just came into the identity space when I was in my 40s, so it's never too late to come into identity, I would say. And it's been an amazing, awesome community. I've built like a great friendships with folks from across the globe, from Germany to the US to like all corners of the world in this space. And everyone is friendly, always excited to learn new things and always excited to share new things as well. And everyone tries to just build up the community. So that's the thing that I really love about the whole identity space. And it's at the center of everything. So it's an apt name as well for the podcast.
Well, it's a good thing I trademarked it so long ago. Let's talk about your recent journey, right? You said you're recent into IAM. What were you doing before IAM? And then what caused you to switch? Yep. Or was it just like, oh, all of a sudden I'm in IAM, or was it something you consciously sought out?
Yeah. So when I first started, like way back when I was really young, and this was when NT was just coming out with the whole idea of the Active Directory, I was reading this whole NT book and I was just falling asleep reading it after I couldn't just go past the first 5 pages. And so then I knew like, no, this is not my passion, but I really loved dev, like writing, building things, creating things. And so I just went down the dev path, building applications. It used to be Windows apps, then web apps, and then like things like SharePoint and all of that. So that's what I've been doing all throughout my career, like being a solution architect. I really love solving problems and, building things for folks. And sort of you get to create new things. And that's what I really like, the whole creativity that's involved in that. So security, identity were like the last things on my mind. But I just accidentally fell into the role of leading the whole Microsoft 365 team at one of the largest companies in Australia, like my previous role at Telstra. And that's when I saw this new cloud scale Azure AD at that time, Entra ID, and it was very different to the on-prem AD world where the slightest sneeze and you could bring down the AD environment, and like they were always on pins, the admins that were managing it. And then I saw this cloud scale Azure AD, which, you could throw call APIs into it. It would never go down. It had resilience built into it. And I was like, this is the future. And so I started playing around with it and just accidentally fell into the whole security thing. And then my manager at Microsoft, who hired me in, he just called me once and said, there's this role, are you interested? And I was like, what would someone do? Like, it's just a login page. Like, what's the amount of work that you can have in identity? Because coming from a dev background, it's sort of something you always want to just get out of the way. It's just the login page. You just do that because you're focused on building whatever the solution that you're working on. And yeah, so now the joke's on me. I'm doing all identity now and not dev stuff. But yeah, it's never too late, I would say, to come into identity. And folks from different backgrounds and walks of life, we can bring in a lot of knowledge and experience into this space. So it sort of helps, from all different aspects. So I'm learning lots of new things, and one of my passions is sharing that. And I feel because I've not grown in identity, like the way I talk about things is in simple layman term. Like I don't even know, the complex words for these things. So it sort of helped me connect with lots of the other folks who are coming into identity. Maybe even they don't even realize they're in identity, but you just accidentally fall into that flow, right? You might be doing firewall rules and things in the past, and now you're like creating conditional access policies and thinking how identity and networking, all of that flowing together. So, yeah, like I would say it's a welcoming space. Usually just for me, identity found me, and I've never been the happiest than I've been like right now. I tell everyone, like, look, guys, I feel like I'm retired. Like I love what I'm doing and I get paid for it. And there's absolutely no stress. And I love to come and talk about things about identity with folks. So yeah, I'm enjoying life and enjoying working at Microsoft.
Well, that's great. I always find it interesting to talk about people's backgrounds, because I think a lot of people think that identity is a technical role or a technical job. And that might be true. There are certainly roles within identity that are technical, but there's a lot of roles that aren't, right? They're more focused on the business or communications. You mentioned, really kind of speaking plain English, right, to people, to explaining it. I feel like sometimes there should be in your Duolingo app or Google Translate, one of the options should be identity to English, right? Or whatever your native language is, because we get stuck in this world of acronyms. And, if you're talking with other people who are fluent in identity, that's one thing. But we have to be able to communicate this stuff to, real people who aren't, identity people. And that art of communication and being able to translate is sorely needed. I find a lot of organizations really struggle with, being able to articulate in a way that makes sense for people. It's like, oh, we're going to introduce SAML. Cool. What does that mean? What does that mean to the end user? They don't care. Like, oh, you mentioned working logon boxes. Remember how you have like 50 different logon boxes? Well, guess what? What if there's only one and they all work the same and you had a very consistent experience? Would that make sense? Oh, okay. That makes sense. Let's do that. You are now a product manager with Microsoft. I guess, talk me through, what does that mean? What does a product manager at Microsoft mean from a role perspective? Talk to me about your day-to-day and how that works.
Yes, yeah. So the team that I'm in is called the Customer Experience Product Manager. And my team is sort of like a global team. We are spread out across the globe, from folks in the UK, in Germany, in Japan, Singapore, and like all across the globe. We do have the feature PMs who actually build out, write the specs, meet with customers, or it could be standards related stuff that they're working on. So they focus on the specific feature that they're building and like how it ties in with the rest of the capabilities that Entra has. So it's sort of like I try to think of it as like there are three parts to the whole story. So we have the engineering leads and the teams that actually are the brains of it and who write the code, make sure it all fits in with the overall architecture and it's built to run at cloud scale. We have like billions of sign-ins happening, trillions of signals coming in. every single day. So they think of all of that. We have the feature PMs who write the specs, and they ask for feedback from everyone. And I work with a few large customers over here in Australia, and we sort of give our feedback into, like, when there are specs written, early feedback into sharing our reviews of the specs. And have you thought about this? Have you thought about how something happens in Australia, like the various government rules or the different challenges we have in different countries? And the enterprise customers have different needs as well. Things work in one way, which might be very different to other countries. For example, in Australia, we have this whole idea of contractors and contracting. So in any organization, you might find, like, maybe sometimes even half or more might be contractors who are working, from other companies, and you would have the full-timers being like a smaller percentage. So which is a very interesting, different dynamic, right? Like, not everyone has a work laptop from the same company. They might be bringing their own laptops, and when you build the product, you need to make sure that you don't make assumptions about how it might be in different countries and so on. So giving that sort of customer specific feedback into those reviews. And we also connect the feature PMs with the different customers. So we usually measure a lot at Microsoft with everything, and we also speak a lot with customers and hear what they're saying, hear their feedback. And we run these things called private previews. So before the world sees anything, we basically work a lot with some of our key, very large customers and also the smaller customers to hear their feedback on a new feature that we're building. And that's how we make sure that we are building the right thing, that it's something that customers want, and it's not something, that would be where we would need to go back and rework a lot of things. So we have these different rings of releases called the private previews. It's all done under NDA, so they won't really share about it externally, but they do guide us quite a lot. And then we get to the public preview stage where we share it with everyone, but it's still in a state where we can make changes. The APIs can change, the feature itself can change. Sometimes it gets to that stage and we realize we need to go back to the drawing board. It happens, but very rarely. And then after it's baked in, that's when we hit this phase called general availability, and it becomes like fully supported and usable. So my day job is spent on part of it with customers, hearing their challenges about features that we already have, and then feeding that into what they're doing. Then the other part is spending time on the internals that we are building on new features and capabilities, and then also working and sharing on docs and the external documentation and things. And each of us have a special sort of area we specialize in, and different things that we do. But that's sort of like how we build stuff at Microsoft in the identity space. One of our leaders, the leadership team is resolve was we want to make Entra ID sort of the most customer connected product at Microsoft. And so it speaks volumes to my role and the number of people we have who are being with customers and driving that feedback into the product.
So Merrill.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I thought you were done.
No,
done
yeah,
there.
go ahead. Yeah.
I think that, your job title is product manager, but if I was to come up with a title for you, it would be developer advocate, right? This is such an area of passion for you. You said your background was development. In Entra ID, you're kind of looking at Entra ID through the lens of a developer, right? We all have, whatever our background is, we all have a place and identity, but we all come to it with a perspective based on where we come from. So that's an area of passion for you, right? Is really trying to look at the Entra ID platform from that developer perspective and make sure that as the product continues to evolve, it evolves so that developers want to work with it. Is that right?
Yes, absolutely. That it's developer friendly and developer first, and also for me, I'm an admin, but I want to manage it through code, like DevOps, and because we are sort of the gateway, right? Like Entra, the name is you're entering in because you're going into the different application, whatever it is that you're going to access. And like the security of what we do is really important. And I want to bring that maturity from the DevOps and the dev world into the identity and the security space, so that you're not just relying on like ClickOps, you click things and then you have the configuration, but you want to have that in code so it can be audited and you know who changed what at when, and see all of that work together, put together. That's one of my passions and what I feel I'm bringing into the identity space.
Yeah, it's really cool. I'm trying to wrap my brain around, so what is the scope of DevOps when it comes to Entra? Because I think a lot of platforms, that scope is, rather than ClickOps for migrating configurations that were maybe tested in an earlier environment and pushing those to production in kind of a packaged way or in a more predictable way. You're not going to forget a configuration, etc. Is that kind of the scope, or is it much more than that?
It's much more than so. DevOps includes a lot of different things. Testing is a big part. So right now, I've been working with some folks in the open source world on a product that will help you, a framework that will help you write tests for your configuration. Because a lot of the times there was the Microsoft Threat Defense report that said 95% large amount of the attacks that we've seen, or they resulted because of some misconfiguration, right? So it was not turned on. Some sort of security issue happened because the admins hadn't configured it properly. And I've seen this happen with some of my customers as well. Like they thought they had one setting, but then over the course, something had changed and no one realized that it had changed. And maybe they didn't think about the bigger picture of when they were making that change. So you end up in in your mind, you have this setting and this config, but in reality, it's not that. And it's allowing folks to come in to your tenant. Maybe, a simple thing like one customer had a policy that said anyone who's coming in as a guest or an external identity should be signing out every single day. Like their sessions should be killed. They shouldn't be allowed to come in with that same token the next day because you don't know what endpoint they're coming from, right? So the token could have been stolen and, it could be a different actor. You can't enforce compliant device policies on them. But what happened was somebody went and changed the group that was scoping all the guests. So they didn't change the actual policy itself. They made a change to the group, the rules for the dynamic group. And suddenly the policy was there, but it was not doing anything. And all those guests, their sessions were long lived, for months on end. They had access. No one prompted them to sign in. And so you could end up with something like that. So one of the things I want to introduce with DevOps is to be able to have regression tests for your config and setting. You're not going to go and sit and look at it, right? So when you introduce a new change, how do you write a small test for it? In the dev world, we write tests in Python, you have pester, JUnit, and all of that. So how do you write a test that checks those settings? And then you can be having over time hundreds of tests, and they can be running every day. So the moment something changes, hey, someone changed the security policy. Whether it could be someone inadvertently doing it, or it could be some real threat that could have changed, and you might need to go and update your test if it's a valid change or not. So that whole DevOps practice and bringing that rigor to the identity space is one of my passions.
So it's really a mile wide, in terms of the scope. But I did want to hone in a little bit on that. So I was setting up an angle, and I was hopeful that you're going to say, Jim, that's exactly what it is. Because something I see with my clients all the time is a great variance in terms of how they do pre-production and testing.
Yes.
And I will say what I see the most, even in larger organizations that are, and in some cases, maybe it's more in large organizations where they have some type of QA version of Entra or Active Directory, but it's a far cry from a copy of production.
Absolutely.
Okay. And so they can't do, so say you're rolling out an IGA system or some other identity tool. When you get to the QA version of your identity tool, you're not interfacing with the QA Active Directory or Entra ID because it's so far from production as to be almost useless. And I guess the question I have for you is, where does Microsoft stand in terms of best practice or kind of advice to your customers in terms of where should they be on the QA spectrum? Should they be using production for QA, or should they have a QA environment, and how closely does it need to match production?
Yes. And that's one of the things about working at Microsoft. Our customers we work with are so vast, right? You will have the small mom and pop shops having Microsoft tenant, and they're like the 2 or 3 people in that with their mailbox, and they have access to that. And then we have these large enterprises which might have like 500,000 users in the tenant, like an entire a nation of school students like signing into like one tenant with millions of users in there. So it varies quite a lot in terms of our audience. So it's very hard for us to say, like, this is the one way, go and do it. So we give a lot of guidance, and it all boils down to the maturity of each organization and how much they focus on the security and, what pains they go through. And then they realize, okay, we need to do this. In the past where I've worked before, you always need to have a DevTestProd tenant, and it depends on who gets to work in those spaces, right? Like, there are things in the Entra tenant that are like tenant level specific settings. So you can't really test them anywhere else other than in a different tenant, right? You can't change like the core conditional access policies or, the authentication methods for someone to signing into the tenant. You can't play around with those in the production environment. You might, if you block out FIDO2 keys, you put the wrong AA GUID and say block these, you might not allow anyone to sign into the tenant. Even the admin themselves might get locked out of the tenant.
Ransomware yourself.
Yes, yeah, yourself, right? Which we've learned in the last few weeks, how you can basically block everyone out. And as the identity person, it's your responsibility, right? Like, you're not wanting to do any changes that could, impact the entire org, and no one can do their work for the day, and you lose millions as a result of, that action. So if for those sorts of things, you would want to have a different tenant, at least 1 or 2, like a DevTestProd. I'll share on the link maybe in the notes you can share, like model that we have for DevOps to have DevTestProd, where in the dev environment, you do a lot of innovative changes, try new things. The public preview features that I spoke about, you would try them on. Like right now, passkeys are in public preview phase in Entra ID. So that's where you would be trying out these new auth methods and different config to see how things work. You might not be trying it out in prod right now, right? Some of those public preview features. And then as those features get into GA or you're pushing out a new change, that's when you would, move those changes out into, your pre-production and then into the actual production environment. So depending on the type of change, you can do that. But when it comes to things like governance and packages and access to things, it's again a hard thing, right? Like ideally, in an ideal world, you would have like a Salesforce environment for production. You would also have a Salesforce environment for, your development or pre-production. But you might not always have the luxury of having 2 versions of every single app in your organization. So you would try to make the best of what you can, or at least, the core big applications like your HR application, like the things that provision identity through and so on. You would ideally want to have, the dev, test, and prod instances of those, because those are things you cannot just change in production immediately, right? You need to test them through those changes.
Yeah, definitely. And I've always, that's one thing I've found frustrating is I think a lot of SaaS platforms and applications now, they just say you get a production and a sandbox. And what is the sandbox? Sandbox QA is a dev. I need more predictability.
Yes.
So it's always been like a point for me, but that's another topic for another day, I guess.
Yeah.
One last thing in this DevOps area is, all the attention in the world right now seems to be on machine IDs and the importance of machine IDs. And when it comes to DevOps, I mean, it's a major consumer of machine IDs. Yeah. What are some of your perspectives there when it comes to machine IDs?
Yeah, so non-human identities, they're very powerful, and it's a way where a lot of attackers get into environments because you leave your secrets lying around, emailing them to people, and when the attackers get access to the email, they can then access, the secrets, or you check it into GitHub accidentally, and those things live forever, right? Unless you know how to go in and prune them out. Even if you delete the file and do a new commit, it's still there in history and people can get to those secrets, and, having hygiene around rotating it. So I really love the whole identity industry moving and working across the board, coming up with the standards. And, we have the workload identity federation now, where you can use completely parcelless identities in AWS and Azure and work across the different clouds without any secrets or certificates involved. You don't need to worry then about rotation. So those are the things I think we as an industry need to move towards, getting rid of all these secrets and certificates and moving to more using the platform and those signals. But then that opens up a new channel, right? Like someone can add in a new identity. And if you're not carefully monitoring who added that in, now suddenly someone has standing access to whatever that service principal can do. And when you do DevOps, you usually give a lot of permissions to these service principals because they need to go in and maybe configure your key policies, security settings in the tenant. So you need a lot of monitoring and visibility into what is happening with that identity, what APIs is it calling, is it suddenly doing something different from what it was supposed to be doing? So it is becoming like you're fixing one thing, but then there are other aspects now that you need to worry about. So you get rid of certificates and secrets and move away from them. But then you need to start thinking of how you manage these identities. Do you have a good list of, all the identities in your tenant, and what are the permissions they have? What do they do? And just like we review governance for humans, we need to review these non-human identities as well, right? Like, is this app still being used? Is this script still being used? Does it need this permission? Usually what happens is someone does a big migration project and they create these identities and they have a lot of permissions, right? Because they're creating moving mailboxes, creating packages and so on. And then the project always runs over time, right? It goes over and no one does the cleanup. So you have these really powerful identities that suddenly they can read everyone's emails and no one did the work to close off the project and remove the identity. So in Entra, we've been working on adding access reviews for machine identities and making sure there's an owner who actually comes in and says, yes, I still need this identity. It still needs this permission, and they close it off and have the governance in place for those. So yeah, it's really important.
Yeah. That's always been my perspective, is that it always eventually boils back down to some human being saying whether or not this non-human account should be or should not be. So yeah, it's a big problem to solve, and I'm glad this industry's paying attention to it, probably more now than ever. Just a point of clarification, you mentioned service principles. What are service principles?
Sorry, so it's Microsoft terminology. So we have these user principles, user accounts, and in when we were in on-prem AD, we basically took the same user identity with the username and password, and we used that for automation as well. So when we moved to the cloud and Entra, we didn't want to take that approach at Microsoft. So we actually wanted to treat these separately as non-human entities, and we gave it a name as a service principle. So you have the user principle where the authentication method, you do an interactive sign-in, and it's what you see in the login screen and people sign in. In Entra, we also have these service principles, which is only meant for non-human identities. They call into APIs, and there's a different permission model that you have, right? Just you don't give it like a global admin or an overall user admin role. It needs to be very explicit based on what, this, it can only read people's mailboxes. So you can scope it down. And so the permission model and how you manage it is different between user and service. We've been on a journey for a while, educating our vendors and all of them to move to this whole model of using service principles. But a lot of devs, unfortunately, from the field that I come in, they take the easiest way, right? Give me a username and a password, and then I just automate with that. But a big change that Microsoft is rolling out is enforcing MFA for all user principles for Azure. So that as we speak right now, there's this rollout that's happening. We've told everyone that we are going to enforce. There's no way for them to turn it off. It's going to be enforced. So guess what? A lot of the vendors, others who did this shortcut of using user identities for their automation and their applications, now they will need to fix those to use service principles, the right way of doing it, instead of using the user identities, because you won't be able to bypass the MFA for those. Yeah.
That's cool. I really love that. So that's a topic we could go on for many more hours, but that's not the format of our podcast. So one area that Jeff and I are passionate about, and since we have you here on the hot seat, we're going to ask you about it, is identity governance and administration. And it's something that Microsoft has teased, I think, for a long time. So we want to understand, what is the current state of IGA for Microsoft, and what can we kind of expect to see here in the not too distant future?
Yes. So IGA with Microsoft has been growing up. It was just part of Entra before. And last year we announced Microsoft Entra ID governance as its own product. So it's not just part of Entra, part of AD that you get. It's standalone product. So it's matured quite a lot, and that's why we now have it as its own thing. And there is something that you would acquire separately to what you get with Microsoft 365 and identity. So it is growing up, and we've added a ton of new features from lifecycle governance to managing identities in different applications. There's work we've been doing on the provisioning and opening out how you could provision. We wanted to get it right. So initially we worked with just a few cloud providers like Workday, etc., to provision identities directly into Entra ID. What we are really doing is we are looking into the future. So when we are building at Microsoft, it's always looking into the future of where things are going to be. And so our initial vision was working with all these cloud HR vendors. And the world eventually now is moving, right? You will see, and you would have been seeing it firsthand, right? Like all of the HR systems are being revamped and people are moving to the cloud. And we wanted to make all of them work in a cloud native way. Like there's no point bringing identities back to on-prem and then syncing them up again into the cloud when those HR systems can directly talk to your identity provider and provision identities, and they can then do things in real time, right? So when someone is let go or they change roles, within minutes of the change, when it should trigger, it can then be pushed into the identity provider in the cloud, and that can then control all the, the access packages they need, the birthright access and things like that. So our focus has been building on those fundamentals to get all those things right. That was the initial focus. But now we are starting to focus on like the overall workflows, and we've added the lifecycle workflow capabilities. But one of the key things that Microsoft does, and as I mentioned to you, right, like we have customers from various scales, right? Like folks who might have 10 users, 100 users, and there will be like millions of customers like that. And then we go to the larger enterprises. So we want to build a product that will actually work for a wide range of these folks. And for people who might not have the luxury of having an IAM consultant come in and set things up. So we worked a lot on simplifying the experience of creating these service catalogs of applications and having maybe someone in the HR team itself defining what the packages are for them. So our goal has been to make it widely usable by larger scope of users, and which is overall good for the overall industry, right? Like it's not something that only enterprises and folks who can afford it who would be doing it. We are bringing more people into this more model of you really need to have governance and least privilege. The old school way of you get VPN and you sign in and you suddenly have access to all the servers and the SharePoint sites and the teams and the groups without any governance on it. We want to change that. And so it takes a different sort of approach to make it accessible to all of those folks who are not really IAM experts to be able to go in and say, okay, I understand this. I just need to set some of this in a simple way and be able to get that going. So that's sort of the fundamentals we've been doing. But now we are focusing on the enterprise and bringing all of the enterprise capabilities as well into governance. So yes, it's a journey. We are still getting to that point, but we also want to bring in a new way of thinking. Like we don't want this to be very complex where you need an army of people and a 3-year project to roll out identity, and do it right. So we want to democratize that at Microsoft.
Well, it's great to hear that it's opening up, because I think, historically one of the challenges has been, Microsoft products work great for Microsoft things, but once you fall outside of Microsoft, it struggles a little bit. I think open standards definitely helps with that, right? We see the turnaround with Entra supporting, open standards and not just proprietary or custom things, which is great. I find that there's still a lot of companies that are not yet fully cloud.
Yes.
And so we're in this weird hybrid state where we've been for a while. I'm anticipating we'll be for a while.
Yes.
And so, how do I leverage something like Entra IGA capabilities when I have on-premise applications that may or may not be Microsoft? I have cloud applications that may or may not be Microsoft, right? I mean, you've got things all over the place. Is there a plan for kind of pulling that all together now that you feel like you've got sort of the basic structure in place?
Yes, absolutely. And that's what we are focusing on right now. Like with things like, the MIM connectors and all of the things that we had that were great in the on-prem world. We just wanted to make sure we designed it right, because it had to work at the cloud scale, right? With millions of users. You're not just running inside one server now at on-prem. So we wanted to get those right, but we are now working on bringing all those different connectors to the cloud. So we've been adding the ECMA connector, etc., where you can now provision identities and into on-prem Oracle DBs, SQL DBs, and so on. And we've opened out the API. So it used to be just a few HR vendors that we allowed to push into Entra ID, and now it's an open out. And our partners, so we leave a lot of room for our partners to come in and be able to do that value add, and not Microsoft doing everything. So those just came out like last year, and we've been seeing an explosion of all of our partners coming in and building all these connectors, and it gives them a way to provide that value add, because it's not a one size fits all, right? Like in Australia, we have our own HR systems that are really popular. So each country has country-specific apps and services that they use, and our partners are coming in and they are basically bridging that gap and doing that sort of work to be able to build those connectors into the various sorts of different applications that are there. So the journey has just started, but it is moving at a very rapid pace.
Yeah, the ability to leverage APIs, I think, would be a game changer. Yeah. Being able to leverage the power of that. One of the features that Microsoft recently released was Security Copilot. Right, we can't go with an episode of Identity Center without talking about AI. Where do you see things like that, impacting the way Entra approaches things? I know there's already some capability there, but I guess where does Security Copilot really start to gain steam, do you think, when it comes to identity?
Yeah, so in the identity space, one interesting thing is we have been tinkering with, we call it machine learning and stuff before, right? Like when it comes to things like identity protection, our team has been, because they get all these signals and there was no other way to work with all of that than try to do machine learning on all of this. So we talked about service principal and workload identities before, right? So there are detections that our team had built where if an app is calling into someone's email all the time and there's a pattern of, just checking the latest email, and suddenly it starts reading, other mailboxes or sending emails, our machine learning would pick it up as a detection and say, like, we are seeing some anomalous activity of this service principal. So that is something we've been doing for a long time in terms of using machine learning for those detections. But Copilot has sort of opened out things a lot, right? It's sort of brought it to the front, not something you have just in the back end where we're using it for the back end services. You can now have users come in and interactively ask questions and do things. So it's a huge area of investment. What we've launched is sort of, I would say, like the version 1, where you can turn on Entra skills, and there are lots of things you can do today with Copilot, like ask questions about the sign-in logs and tracing through. Like when I work with a customer and they have some issue, we have to go through the different sign-in log, and the token gets reused in different sessions and try to work out how they did what and which policy kicked in. And it takes about, like, it takes skill, and you need time to go through and parse it all together. But now you can just go into Copilot and ask, okay, give me a summary of how this session went and what they did. And within a few seconds, you get a nice English readable format of what really happened, which is so powerful when you're like not an SME in that whole space and you need to know quickly and then decide whether you need to block access till you fix that account, recover that account if it's been compromised. So yeah, that's what we've released, and there's a lot the team is thinking about and building that will be coming out soon. So it is definitely an exciting space, and it's just evolving at such a rapid pace, right? Some people say, like, it's costly, but then you can see with even GPT-4, the price, like they just halved the price for ChatGPT, I think last week. The APIs, like the cost went down. So we are tweaking and fine tuning all of that and making them more efficient. So it's going to be something that's going to be like leveraged and used in a lot of contexts. And
yeah, it's a huge game changer for like every context. Yes. I think about IGA, and I think about a business user being able to create an access review ad hoc.
Yes. Yeah.
Just by describing what they want to see in the results.
Yes.
Who has access to this certain role in my application and has used it within the past 60 days?
Absolutely.
And then, Jim McDonald comes back. Okay, tell me what Jim McDonald has done in my application over the past 60 days. I think, being able to query and quiz based on human language model, so powerful.
Yeah, the voice.
As long as it's accurate.
Yeah, that's true. As long as it's not hallucinating. Does
not hallucinate, right, or anything like that.
Yes, the hallucination part is the one where, like Copilot for security, that's one of our big things, right? Like it can't say the wrong thing. It better not say the thing than giving you the wrong answer. So there's a lot they've been working on that model to make sure that it's not sort of the translation or the other sorts of models that can be used, but I can't wait till the day where you can just talk to it and ask questions and, get a Jarvis like assistant with that. But yeah.
I'm bummed that you guys went away from the Cortana branding because I think like this would have been perfect. Like, it was like Cortana was a few years ago. Like now it's like, oh, this is actually could be Cortana. So I'm hopeful that there will be a resurrection of that because I think that's a way better name. No offense to whoever created Security Copilot, but Cortana is way better from a name.
Definitely, though, I think room for the voice assistant to come in and be doing that, right? So I've seen people already doing that. They're driving and then they're asking, like, you can be doing this access review while you're driving in the car, right? Like you have this voice integration and you're just asking things. So you don't need to wait till you get to a desk and click on all these things before you can do your access reviews.
Is that a preview of like an upcoming Microsoft commercial for Entra? You can do your access review in your car. Said nobody wants that. Wait till you get to your desk or something like that. All right, we're getting close to an hour, so we want to try to wrap things up. And it's very early for you, so we want to let you get on with your day. Before we started talking, you mentioned that one of the things you like to do to sort of decompress and get out of conquering the IAM world is to go hiking. Yes. So tell me about hiking, and for specifically, what's the longest or furthest that you've ever gone? Let's call it in a single trip. Like how long and how far did you go?
I'm relatively new to hiking, and I love it as a way to sort of decompress, because if not in the role that I'm in, I'm always like consuming, learning new things and things that are not yet out, and like it's a lot you take in. And I found out that I need space to like just spend time, sort of a meditation, not think about work and those things. But it's also the time that I get inspired, like, hey, I can do this. I can, new thoughts come in. If not, you're just sort of consumed with these things. So hiking has been a way for me to do that, to be able to walk through and to really just not spend a lot of time connected like others. I spend a lot of time on social media as well, replying and so on. So it gives me a way to just put things away and just be in sort of the zone, just walking on. And the Australian, like where I live in Melbourne, like that's a pastime for many folks, right? To take time out. And we have lots of walks that we have, like, I have the luxury of just being able to drive like 10 minutes and have like huge, vast areas of land that I can go exploring, bush hiking through our national parks. The longest I've done, I'm just relatively new to all of this. So the longest I've done is about like, I would say about 15 hours, where I've walked about like maybe 20 Ks.
I guarantee anything you say is going to be impressive to me. 15 hours in one day. So is that a one day, or is that spread out over a couple of days?
It was like a one day, like a whole day thing that we went on, me and like a group of friends. And so we just talk random things and from different walks of life. So we just like it's nice to be in nature and just go through that where it's really quiet. And the beautiful thing in Australia is you come across wallabies, kangaroos in your walks, and you see this like the amazing nature that you have. And it's,
I was going to ask if you have like any wildlife encounters along the way.
Yeah,
like,
something. Yeah.
What happens when you see a kangaroo? Do you get to a boxing match? Like, how does that work?
So yeah, we try to stay far away as much as possible. But the wallabies are quite harmless. Like they'll just stare at you and you stare at them and like figure out who's going to move out of whose way. And one of us decides to move and then we walk on. But yeah, it's really a nice way to decompress and do things. So yeah, that's been one of my passions. Yeah.
Jim, how are you? How far have you ever hiked? I know you've hiked kind of all over the place, but what's your distance record?
So my distance record, I think, was when I did a nice stretch of the Appalachian Trail, did 100 miles, which is like 160K. That was over 5 or 6 days. So you're backpacking in a 20-pound pack on top of the fact, or I'm sorry, like a 50-pound pack on top of the fact that you're, walking 20 miles a day. So
And it's not like a flat area, right? You're going up
Oh,
and down and around.
it's very rocky in the Appalachian Trail. So the part that I did was in Pennsylvania, and it's some of the most beautiful country. It's like you're on like a mountain ridge, and it's very rocky, very hard. There is some up and down, but like what you pointed out is it's not like walking 20 miles on the sidewalk. I've also
Which is where you'll find me.
I've also hiked from Tuolumne area of Yosemite down to the valley. In that hike, you go up to about 14,000 foot elevation. At that level, the air is much thinner. So you walk like from here, you start setting goals. I'm going to walk from here to there, and then I'll take a break. I'm going to walk from here to there, and then I'll take a break, which is just catching your breath. I mean, it is exhausting when you start hiking. And I was backcountry hiking, so you have to be prepared for bear and everything. So they give you these bear-proof canisters. Put all your food, your deodorant, anything that a bear would want to get to, and it looks like a mini keg. It's rubber coated.
And then you throw it up over a tree branch or something.
You throw it up over a tree branch, and then the bear will probably try to get it if they smell it. But I actually wanted to see a bear in Yosemite.
Come on over. I'll show you them because they come through my property all the time.
I know. Well, you always show me, so that's pretty cool. But my big passion now is tracking my steps. I shouldn't say it's a big passion. It's something I got onto recently because I realized, the iPhone's always tracking your steps. And I've been trying to hit like 8,000 steps a day at a minimum. That's a lot of steps. But I think if I hiked 20 miles with my iPhone in my pocket, it probably would have been like 50,000 steps in a day. It literally would have been off the charts.
You should get like a watch or a ring or something in that car. Like your phone is not like, if you're going to be that dedicated to it, you probably get something. Oh, look at me. I got the watch and the ring. So who knows?
I've been thinking about
and the only steps I'm taking are like from my desk to the refrigerator and back.
Well, what got me passionate about it was it's just walking. The human body is made to walk long distances. And it's actually one of the best things you can do for your health is just, they say your goal should be 10,000 steps a day. If you get 10,000 steps a day and then you drink a lot of water and stuff, like your health could improve dramatically just from doing those two things. Now, walking 10,000 steps a day when you're very sedentary is hard to start, but you don't have to start at 10,000 steps. Start where you're at and then just try to increase it and then make it I don't know. Yeah. The technology side of tracking it is also right up my alley. So I think, Jeff, you should give it a whirl.
I mean, I track it. I mean, everything's tracked. I'm just full of metrics. I get most of my steps on travel days. So airports, terminals, all that type of stuff. So I'm flying to Dallas tomorrow. I'm sure I'll get my steps in. I'm flying back home from Dallas on Sunday. I'll get steps there. And then I go to, where do I go? Then I go to South Bend. So the travel days are my step days because I definitely, because for whatever reason, the travel, whoever always lands me at the furthest, gate, farthest away from the exit. And so, it's like a good 1.5 miles, 2 miles from landing to actually getting out of the airport.
Here's a tip.
I was going to mention.
Here's a tip I have.
I was going to mention that to you, Jeff. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So
Merrill.
one tip for your audience,
right,
is to say, just go out for a walk, put the podcast on, and do your 1 hour walking while you're listening to the podcast. And no distractions. Yep. you can just step out of the house and walk till the podcast finishes and come back. So.
And a lot of people do that. Like, this podcast is good for about a 2 mile walk, roughly, at a relatively decent pace. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower. Okay, why don't we go ahead and wrap it up there? I'm not much of a hiker. For me, it's travel days and going up and down the stairs to my refrigerator to get another can of Coke Zero in between meetings. So we'll go ahead and have links in our show notes. So all of our discount codes will be there. We'll put a link, Merill, to your LinkedIn profile so that people have questions or want to reach out and follow you. They can find you there. And then Also, the Twitter link that talked about the Entra DevOps tenant model. So you're kind of share that. We'll have it on our show notes so people can check that as well. So you can visit us on the web, idacpodcast.com. We're on Twitter, X, whatever it's called, when you listen to this or watch it, at IDAC Podcast. The YouTube channel, youtube.com/@IDAC Podcast, or even easier, just idacpodcast.tv. Take us straight to the YouTube channel. We're still trying to grow that, so give us a like and a subscribe over there and show some support for the show. We'd greatly appreciate it. So always connect with Jim and I on LinkedIn. Send us ideas for shows. Want to give a special shout out to Pam Dingle for making this introduction and bringing Merrill into our lives. So thank you very much, Pam, for that. And we'll go ahead and leave it there. Thanks, everyone, for watching and or listening, and we'll talk with you all in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com. See you next time on Identity at the Center.